Okay, welcome to tonight's LaRouche Fireside Chat for Thursday, May 11th. What we're going to do tonight is continue a discussion which Richard Freeman began 2 weeks ago on the science of physical economy. And we will go right into it, but by way of introducing this discussion, what I'm going to do is play something which I don't believe people have heard. Now, even if you have read something about Robert Kennedy Jr. reasserting his view that there is overwhelming evidence that the Central Intelligence Agency was involved in the assassination of his uncle, President John F. Kennedy, you have probably not heard, because I was not able to find it in anything I saw in written media. You probably not actually heard exactly what he had to say about it. So what we're going to do is play you approximately 1 minute of his discussion. There may be a few words that you do not get or hear clearly as a result of some of the speaking problems that RFK Jr. has, but he's referring to the Sidwell Friends School. That was the school that he attended as a youth. So when you hear him say, you may not hear it exactly the name, but that's what the name is. So I'm just filling that in. We're going to play this, and then I will tell you why knowing this provokes a certain approach that we will take tonight. And I'll play it.
Democratic presidential candidate RFK Jr. had some interesting remarks about potential government conspiracies involved in deaths in his own family, making these remarks on Sean Hannity's show the other night. Let's watch.
The day that my uncle was killed, I was picked up at Sidwell Friends School and brought home. The first phone call that my father made after J. Edgar Hoover told him that his brother had been shot was to the CIA desk officer in Langley, who was only a mile from our house. Yeah. And my father said to him, "Did your people do this?" His next call was to Harry Ruiz, who was one of the Cuban Bay of Pigs leaders who had remained very, very close to our family and to my father. My father asked him the same question. Then my father called John McComb, who was the head of the CIA, and asked him to come to the house. McComb came over, and when I came home from Sidwell Friends School, my father was walking in the yard with John McComb, and my father was posing the same question to him. Was it our people who did this to my brother? So it was my father's first instinct that the agency had killed his brother. We could spend the whole...
Okay. It was my father's first instinct that the agency had killed his brother. Now, there's a second excerpt which I'm not going to play because it doesn't need to be played, but I will characterize it for you. And this is an interview which a few may have seen, but this was done by retired journalist Ted Koppel with Henry Kissinger on the occasion of Henry Kissinger's 100th birthday. Now, so this was done this just the last few days. And Koppel asks Kissinger, if you have one of your assistants here place a call to President Xi Jinping of China, would he get on the phone? And Kissinger says there's a good chance that he would get on the phone. And then Koppel asks him, if you called President Vladimir Putin, would he get on the phone? And Kissinger says, probably. And then Koppel says something else to him concerning whether if he were asked to get on a plane and go discuss some matter with either of these two leaders, would he be able to do it? And he said, sure, I could do that. I wouldn't be doing that as in a direct capacity. And then Koppel said, well, I wasn't asking you about whether you should be reinstated as Secretary of State. I start like that because the thing that we have to understand is that every element of the dynamics of what appears to people to be going on right now every element of that is determined by the action of November 22nd, 1963, and the arc of continuity on the part of the oligarchy in keeping in place the policy that was being challenged by JFK and next challenged by Lyndon LaRouche 20 years after Kennedy's assassination in 1963 by what occurred on March 23rd, 1983. Now, the mistake that is made is that when these matters are discussed, they are completely divorced or separated from the realm of economy. Not only are they inseparable from the realm of economy, economy, and specifically the United States economy, cannot be understood. And these political events cannot be understood except from the standpoint of including the role of Lyndon LaRouche in the proposal which became known popularly as the Strategic Defense Initiative because of what Ronald Reagan, the way in which he sought to implement the policy. But the LaRouche proposal was not a mere military proposal. It was a proposal for the transformation of the entire platform of economic production of the world through a collaboration written out in a draft memorandum of agreement, actually by LaRouche, which he drafted, between the Soviet Union and the United States to pursue a policy of incorporating the most advanced laser and related capabilities into the machine tool sectors of both economies for the purpose of creating a higher production platform within which domain thermonuclear weapons would become obsolete. So it was not an arms control negotiation. It wasn't a thing about reducing nuclear weapons. It wasn't even, in the normal sense, a peace negotiation. It was those things, but it wasn't those things in the form in which that's normally thought. It was a way of superseding the entire discussion, the discussion of Kissinger's, or at least not his authored, but he was the person who became known for the policy of mutual and assured destruction. And LaRouche wrote a document at the time called, I don't remember the exact title, but it was Only Beam Weapons Can End the Kissinger Regime of Mutual Assured Terror. And that's what Lynn understood he was doing. Unfortunately, Henry Kissinger still survives, and more than survives, is very involved in even a day-to-day way to this day in pursuit of what? Of what he discussed on May 10th of 1982 on the occasion of his an anniversary of the founding of British intelligence. I believe it was the 200th anniversary, the official anniversary. And he was speaking, and he was speaking on describing how his role in his incarnation as Secretary of State, he had kept the British intelligence services and diplomatic services better informed than the President of the United States, which he stated. And he stated his agreement with Winston Churchill over Franklin Roosevelt in terms of the great debate that occurred between them about the post-World War II world and how it ought to be shaped, in which, of course, Roosevelt had made it clear that he intended to end the domination in the world of the Dutch, French, Portuguese, and British empires. And Churchill violently objected that he would, under no circumstances, be the prime minister that presided over the death of the British Empire, dismantling the British Empire. So as we go into tonight and we look at, for example, the press conference that happened a couple of days ago in Washington involving Tony Blinken and the Secretary of Defense, Foreign Secretary Cleverly of Britain, in which Blinken talked about his violent agreement with the British Foreign Secretary on matters of policy, and that this was a very closely coordinated sort of U.S. and Britain versus China and Russia. As we look at that, and we go into the discussion tonight, what we are going to tell you is that the discussion we're about to have, which is a return to a topic introduced 2 weeks ago, is the central matter to be understood in order to defeat that Kissingerian age and the British impact and dominance of American policy, foreign and domestic, up to this moment. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Richard Freeman. And I know that we, again, sent out an email. So if for those of you that may not have kept that email from 2 weeks ago, there was one today. Hopefully you received it. And Richard will be taking up economic matters that pertain to the paper Trade Without Currency that Lyndon LaRouche wrote. So, Richard.
Thanks, Dennis. Good evening, everyone. I would just add one thing to what Dennis said, because I know something about some of the discussions. What was tremendous and also completely ironic about the SDI discussions is that Mr. LaRouche was discussing with the Reagan administration, which was a von Hayek administration, and that in his economic thinking, outwardly. But what he was discussing as one of the features was how you would take the technology of coherent beam weapons and other things of that sort and use it to produce not only technological advances in the United States and in then Soviet Union, but in the developing sector, combined with a debt moratorium, a complete reversal of what outwardly you would think Reagan would be talking about. And yet this was very seriously, this was a major proposal, and as Dennis said, it encompassed the entire world. It was a reorganization of the world economic system and strategic policy, which people might think about when they hear Mrs. LaRouche talk today about a world economic and security architecture. So there's a lot more that could be said on that point, but that's a fascinating point of history, which is why it was so important. And the people who opposed LaRouche on this understood that implication very well. The solution for the collapsing world financial economic system depends, as we indicated, not on bailouts, but on massive packages of infrastructure, machine tool building, science and technology for the whole world, the developing sector, and the depressed United States. But that will only emerge from the highest principles of physical economy developed by Lyndon LaRouche and expressed by his idea of potential relative population density. So you can throw out gross domestic product, you can throw out free trade, you can throw out objective laws of history a la Karl Marx. And I understand there's some people who are work with the Libertarian Party and or think of themselves as Marxists. And if you are on the call, I heartily welcome your discussion and any things that you're thinking and any disagreements you may have, because that's one of the best ways of just having a common understanding through reason of what we can do. I will just mention at the outset, and we'll mention at the end, that we'll have a further discussion on May 25th, and it will be on a paper. It's going to be on Chapter 4 of LaRouche's So You Wish to Learn All About Economics. And it will be posted thanks to Kynan's help. We have it all ready to go and send out to everybody, so you'll have 2 weeks to read it. I will just say now, and I'll repeat this at the end, if you read this, please read it. If you have difficulties, circle them. If something doesn't make sense, circle it. Read it, go through to the end, getting as much as you can so you can get the overall content. And if you do that, combined with what we're discussing tonight, 2 weeks ago, you'll start to get a much, I hope, richer understanding of Mr. LaRouche's powerful conceptions. So with that said, we'll look again at just a few concepts of the trade without currency. One or two that we had last week, but new ones. Remember, the purpose of this is to set up a new world Hamiltonian Confucian credit system for anti-entropic productive growth throughout the whole world, particularly focused on the global south, which we could also call now the global majority. So we have that, but also for the United States, emphatically too. And so we have that as an emphasis of what we're going to be looking at. And I will just want to quote 3 paragraphs myself from what we were discussing last week and make a point about potential relative population density, and then move on to a section of the paper, which I understand we're going to have some volunteers help us read. But the key paragraph, if you have the paper there, there's 3 paragraphs that begin on page 47 under the heading, The Practice and the Theory. And LaRouche is talking about the practice and the theory of a new world credit and monetary system based on a basket of hard commodities, which means productive capabilities, without a official currency like the dollar was from 1944 through the present. Although it's having, as people probably know, a greatly diminished role week by week. So LaRouche writes, and if you have the paper, I'd ask you to read along with me, because this is the part where LaRouche connects his idea of putting together a synthetic unit for conducting trade and loans for high technology, for massive capital development, for massive infrastructure, particularly in the developing sector. It's the 3 paragraphs where we connect that to its concept of potential relative population density. So I will just read those. And it says, the key to establishing a reasonably determined standard unit of account for a basket of commodities. A unit of account is a unit by which you can settle trade accounts and also make loans. It's a synthetic, but it's very real, and people know how to do this. We've had units of account before in world economic history. The key to establishing this is to reject from the outset the reductionist input-output presumption of Britain's Piero Sraffa, for example, that consumption might be represented as a process of production of commodities by commodities. That concept is economics is just producing one thing and then that produces another thing. It leaves out entirely the concept of people. But people is the subject of economics. And it's people who produce commodities to produce higher quality people, the reverse of commodities by commodities. We must examine the way in which combined market baskets of economic infrastructure, such as public works, combined with household consumption, a second market basket, and with technologically progressive hard commodity forms of increasingly capital-intensive investments in capital goods of production and physical distribution, a third market basket, the industrial market basket, how these 3 increases the relative productive powers of labor, as this is to be measured in physical product per capita and per square kilometer. It is that factor of rate of growth as expressed in hard commodity terms which defines the appropriate notion of assignable economic value. And that's what we're looking for. Next paragraph. So far, this is LaRouche, so far so good, but there is a catch. In some respects, such measurements of growth rates are relatively obvious, but therein lies an often overlooked subtlety, to ignore which may have dreadful results. Consider the more obvious kinds of measurements, and then we might appear to some to be the awfully, what might appear to some to be the awfully clever subtleties. Third paragraph. The essential calculation to be attempted in any rational scheme of economic studies is what is best identified as the potential relative population density of the population of the national economy as a whole. The measurement to be derived from this standard is measurement of the rate of increase or decrease of that potential relative population density. That measurement defines what should be understood as expressing an underlying notion of economic growth. And then he goes through a series of steps. Now, just again to say something about potential relative population density. As I mentioned last time, I think that this is on the equivalent of LaRouche's idea of this, of Kepler's discovery of a harmonic unitary solar system, or Nicholas of Cusa's great breakthrough of the coincidence of opposites, or Gottfried Leibniz's and Pierre Fermat's discovery of the least action principle. It is one of the greatest discoveries that has ever been made. It is the highest discovery of not only economics, but of all mankind and humanity, which we understand through what we can to master the universe, which is what economics is, to develop man's cognitive power. So, again, just to state it again, just the principle of it. Population density, how many people per square mile? And you can look at them around. Boston has 14,000. Montana has 6 per square mile. 14,006 per square mile. New York City has about 27,000 people per square mile. But LaRouche raises 2 very important additional conceptions. Relative potential population density. If you inherit some land or move to it, like the Pilgrims moved to Massachusetts, what did they find? Land that was very rocky. Some people moved to Virginia. What did they find? Virginia clay, which can be a real problem if you're trying to plant things. There's other fertile areas, but those 2 things. But you look at the current technologies developed by mankind collectively over millennia, and you say, okay, we've got too much water, we know how to drain it. We've got too little water, we can irrigate it. We can have seeds that we produce, like Henry Wallace did, for the improved productivity of crops and make them resistant to certain diseases which are common to various types of wheat, grain, various other things of that sort, corn. We also can improve the transportation and movement of these crops, as we did with the Transcontinental Railroad. There was actually 5 of them between 1866 and 1872. And we can also make all sorts of fundamental increases in the machinery that farmers use, in their equipment, combines, reapers, harvesters, and all of those sorts of things. To the point that today, farmers can actually drop on literally 10 square feet of soil, a particular mixture of seed and moisture and other and fertilizer, and they have a mapping in their cab, a computer mapping, which will allow a different combination to be dropped the next 10 square feet. It's absolutely remarkable. My colleague and friend Robert Baker calls it NASA farming. We've made tremendous advances in this area, but that will then change it so that you take an area and suddenly it can only support, I'm making this up, but 10 people per square mile, and now it can support 50 or 100 and advance crops and the ability to be productive. Same thing for factories. No factory can exist by itself. You put down a factory that doesn't have a water system, an electricity system, a road system, you might have the most advanced ideas in the world and plop it down right in the middle of Nebraska, and it will not be able to transport any goods to market or even produce anything because it needs water, electricity, and so forth. So you have to have that infrastructural, what we call mankind's synthetic creation of infrastructure all over the place. And so you can increase the productivity 10, 15 times, particularly with electricity of a certain type. Okay, what's the potential referred to? So we've just dealt with the relative. Relative is bringing it up to the highest standards of science and technology that we know that can make improvements in the land, in the factories, and mankind's cognitive abilities. But what's the potential? The potential is man bringing into existence science and technology which had not existed or were on the cusp of. If we bring in fusion power, that will reorder as an organizing higher principle, another manifold, every single thing we produce in the United States. It just doesn't have to be right on the farm or at the factory. If we develop, for example, various carbon fibers, which can be 8 times stronger than steel, 6 times stronger than aluminum, if we can develop superconductivity, if we can develop various biomedical procedures which depend upon physical principles of spectroscopy, all of which have been looked into, some of which are ready if we only have the will to do it, like fusion, then you have a potential that's far higher than even the relative will raise it to. And as I said last time, where's the limit? Well, there are physical things that you have to be able to do and not do, but there is no limit because it's based on man's creative potential to come up with noetic ideas which make those advances. And he does it not only through new physical principles that are valid and overthrowing old ones, but through art, science, music, and the creative play and tension that they introduce into the power of the mind. And they're not, as I said, extracurricular. They are critical as elements in economics. So that's potential relative population density. And LaRouche built this after his 1948-52 work, intensive work on Riemann and others, and where he figured out how you get ideas into the physical economy, and then summarizes. But this is in the concept of all of mankind and will be used, including in the next phase of BRICS and SCO, where people are trying to work these things out, and we will try and get those ideas. And there are some people who are listening to Lyndon LaRouche's ideas for a long time. I mean, just remember, Helga Zepp LaRouche goes with an idea of the productive, the Silk Road and the land bridge to China over some years, and LaRouche has himself, Mr. LaRouche, and that becomes Xi Jinping's 2013 Belt and Road Initiative. Ideas do change economics, and they change history as well. So with that idea, what I would like to do is go to another part of the paper where LaRouche puts forth, he's now developed, and he goes into potential relative population density, he goes into how you can develop trade, and we can discuss how you set exchange rates. I'm open to that because you want fixed exchange rates. You do not want floating exchange rates. When we went off in August 15th, 1971, fixed exchange rates, we destroyed the capability of the ability to have trade in one respect, because you didn't know whether the dollar was be worth 2 Deutschmarks in 6 months, or 3, or its quoted rate of 2.5, or 7. And any country could be destroyed because with floating exchange rates, speculators could just zoom in on particular currencies, destroy them like they did with the Mexico peso and the Malaysian ringgit, and try and wipe out economies, which is why this neo-colonial, really imperialist system under the International Monetary Fund wrought such destruction. But we can go into those things. What I'd like to do is that LaRouche uses this next part of his paper. And if you have the paper, I'm going to ask you to please turn to page 50 to 51, to 52. And
do you need a reader now?
Sorry?
Whenever you need a reader, I think Kynan's available.
Terrific. What I'm going to do is that this is 8 points. And LaRouche says the relevant theory is in summary as follows. And he said, I have stated these points at length repeatedly during the 5 decades since my first consolidation of my original discoveries in the field of physical economy. So this paper that we're reading is in 2000. So LaRouche is talking about that 1948-52 intensive work that he did. And what I'm going to do is ask for someone to read them 2 at a time, and then if it's Kynan or Jose, to make any comments that they think or so forth. And in the middle of that, I want to go into the question of what anti-entropy and entropy are. I would say that think of these. People are familiar with Helga Zepp-LaRouche's 10 principles, I hope. And you can download them from the Schiller Institute website. You can download them from the LaRouche Organization website and Executive Intelligence Review. And they're intensively the most important principles we can be discussing at this moment to stop nuclear war and to rebuild the economy. This is LaRouche's, I wouldn't call them the 8 principles, but they really are. He doesn't call them that. Summarizing, going back a little bit further into the 1600s, the way he put together his concept of what real economics is. And I think if we can grasp them, use them, and think them through, and, this will give us a further insight into what real mankind is and to what real economics is. So, Kynan, if you could read the first 2, I know you read the first one 2 weeks ago, but if you could read those first 2, and then we'll pause for a second. And again,
Sure.
Everyone, this is on page 50. It's on the second column. It's the last paragraph, next to last paragraph at the bottom of page 50. So please read along if you have the paper.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Maybe a little louder.
Okay. So
A little louder, Kynan.
Is this better?
I think so.
Okay, great. In the science of physical economy, as first defined by the relevant 1671 to 1716 work of Gottfried Leibniz, the specific distinction of the human species from all others is the fact that only mankind is able to increase its species' potential relative population density, its power, by an act of will. In mankind's increasing power within and over the universe, the relevant act of will is expressed as the discovery of what is proven to be a universal physical principle. It is through man's accumulation of that knowledge and man's development of the forms of cooperation through which that knowledge may be applied that our species is permitted to choose willful changes in our species' behavior, through which our species' power in and over the universe is increased in clearly measurable forms. This measurement is expressed essentially in terms of man's increased ability to exist per capita and per square kilometer of the territory under control of a society. Insofar as the term physical science is used to indicate what today's classrooms accept as a notion of modern mathematical physics, both the existence of living processes and of human beings are to be regarded as systemically impossible mathematically. Since the work of Clausius, Grassmann, Kelvin, Helmholtz, Maxwell, Rayleigh, and Boltzmann, among others, during the course of the 19th century, it had become conventional to say that from the standpoint of mathematical physics so defined, the physical universe is governed by a universal law of entropy. The cause for perpetual embarrassment of the advocates of that statistical dogma was that neither living processes nor those processes which set mankind apart from other living processes obey such a rule of universal entropy. Since living processes and persons are a highly efficient part of the universe, certain doubts respecting the honesty and sanity of the advocates of universal entropy had to be mentioned, even at the risk of seeming impolite, of even triggering the expectable explosion of freakishness from the pompous ass teaching the dogma to the class. In economics, real profit of an economy as a whole is expressed as a marginal increase of the potential relative population density. This marginal gain corresponds to what is usefully termed the free energy of the system. Thus, like the living, upward evolving biosphere, the process is characteristically anti-entropic. In real economies, the question whether a taken profit is actually a profit to that economy as a whole finds its answer in comparing nominal profit rates with the actual free energy ratio expressed in terms of correlatives of increases of the potential relative population density. Indeed, most of the profit attributed to the U.S. economy since August 1971, especially since January 1977, has been, in net effect, in the form of pseudo-growth, the burning up, so to speak, of past investments in basic and economic infrastructure, productive capital, and so on, as merely nominal financial accounting profit taken out of the real economy rather than actual free energy added to it.
Terrific. Is there any comment you want to make, Kanyan, on any of that? You don't have to, but if you have some, sure.
I don't have anything.
Okay. What we're going to do is after the question Lyndon LaRouche is posing is two things: free energy to the system and entropy versus anti-entropy. And for those of you who might know us only like 3 weeks or 3 months or maybe 3 years or 30 years, those still may be interesting questions. What the heck is that? What I'm going to try and do is address the entropy question after points 3 and 4 are made. But it's very clear, I will just say, that LaRouche is saying the idea of entropy is insane, that the economy is overcome or somehow it characterizes entropy does not make sense. He would be exposing the freakishness from the pompous ass teaching this dogma to the class. And then he's going to counterpose to that what he considers to be the characteristic anti-entropic forces of the living, of the noetic, mankind, and of the evolving biosphere. So, but if you would be so kind as to read the next couple of paragraphs, and points 3 and 4.
Sure. So this is point 3. Therefore, chiefly in response to the popularization of the Kelvin-Clausius dogma of statistical thermodynamics, apologists for what is still considered today a conventional view of mathematical physics adopted the term negative entropy, a term sometimes abbreviated as negentropy. According to the popularized statistical approach to such subject matters, the prevailing assumption is that A, universal negentropy does not exist. B, processes which appear statistically to exhibit negentropic behavior are able to do so only by increasing the rate of entropy in the environment in which they operate. Ludwig Boltzmann's development of ideas in that direction and the impact of Boltzmann's influence upon his students, notably Erwin Schrödinger's pathetic views on the principles of living organisms, are a notable illustration of the point. 4. Since the 1948 to 52 interval, I have rejected these generally accepted mathematics classroom views on entropy and negative entropy, defining them as reflecting the influence of what is to be recognized specifically as the social disease of neo-Kantian romanticism, the denial of the existence of those consciously apprehensible forms of cognitive synthesis upon which discoveries of universal principles depend absolutely. The paradoxes which show prevailing dogma on entropy and negentropy to be pathological compel us to recognize that the principle of life is a universal physical principle in and of itself, in the sense that the revolutionary work of Carl Gauss's student and follower Riemann defines the notion of a multiply connected manifold. I have added my own original contribution to the science of physical economy, that the principle of cognition is also a universal physical principle. Since, as Vernadsky has presented the case for the biosphere, the anti-entropic principle of living processes is categorically superior to non-living, statistically entropic processes, and since, as the economic history of scientific discovery shows, Characteristically anti-entropic cognitive processes are superior to otherwise merely living processes, since two, respectively distinct universal physical principles of life and cognition must be located in their corresponding place in the body of physical science as a whole.
Great. Now, let's just say what's LaRouche driving at it here. So I'm going to just concentrate. There's many things that he's driving at. This is typical Lynn. But I want to just isolate out this question of entropy and what we would call anti-entropy. And I just put it this way. Sadi Carnot, who was a graduate of the École Polytechnique, a youngster, the son of Lazare, did some fascinating work, and published it on something called the Reflections on the Motive Power of Fire, which was in 1824. What he was trying to look at, because remember, the idea of a heat-powered machine was just beginning to be, I guess the best word to say is commercialized. It spread through the economy of France, Germany, and elsewhere. And so he was trying to figure out how it looked and how it worked. And in the process of looking at this, he came up with what is now known as the Carnot cycle, in which there's in different phases of a cycle of a heat-powered machine, you have pressure expanding, pressure contracting, or remaining the same, temperature rising, temperature lowering, or remaining the same. We won't go through those features of it. But the thing that he noticed, and this was a point of when the efficiency of steam engines was only 3%, meaning of all the potential power or energy you put in the form of fuel, you only got 3% out as work. We've changed that quite a bit since then, but this is in the early phases. And what he noticed was that a machine will have dissipative heat, friction, viscosity in fluids, a whole series of reasons, and that this will cause the fact that the machine can never be 100% thermal efficient or greater than that. You will never get an output greater than an input. Now, Lyndon LaRouche said a real physical economy is greater than 100% thermal efficient. You will get more output than you will input. What does he mean, and what was he addressing? Carnot was merely making an observation of a machine. He was not developing a theory. But Rudolf Clausius comes along, is a real stinker, there's a school of people that LaRouche identifies, and he mentioned kind of some of their names, who were anti-science and anti-human development and anti-development. And he comes along, and in 1850, he already writes a paper on this, and then in 1865, he puts out what are called the first two laws of thermodynamics. The first one is that the energy of the universe is constant, and the second one is that the entropy of the universe tends towards a maximum. And he expressed this in the fact that in a physical system, you're going to have the content of heat increase, but never of cold will never transfer itself the other way, and that heat with a gas causes it to expand, and from that was generalized, well, we have an expanding universe, it's becoming heated, we're going to die from some heat death in the future. That wasn't all him, others then piled on and added these ideas, so that the ultimate view of these, and the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which were expounded and basically are false. The first one has something interesting in it, but it's basically false. The second one is completely a false lie, was that the universe is going to run down, that we're heading to greater and greater disorder, not greater organization, that therefore that's the fate of mankind. And if you want to know some of the underlying principles which showed up in the Rome Club of Rome, there are the limits to growth, and of the horrible outlook of that wicked species mistake called King Charles. That's where it comes from. I mean, no, it actually comes from, I would reverse it. It comes from the oligarchical principle imposed into science, but then it's pumped out through the universities, and every kid is taught this in one form or another, not just in physics. but in social, how people relate to one another and so forth and so on. The point is, LaRouche knew this was a fraud. And what he did is he posited the opposite. He said, look, the universe doesn't work that way. It's anti-entropic. Mankind goes to higher and higher levels of development. Now, how do we do that? If individual machines seem to run down. Well, if a machine has a 3% thermal efficiency, converting only 3% of the heat input into work, you develop a higher machine with an 11% thermal efficiency, and then with 20% thermal efficiency. And now we're in the range of 44 to 52% thermal efficiency. The change is not offsetting the dissipation of heat. That happens. It's like when you're running a tire, your car, and you screech the brakes, it dissipates heat, right? Your tire's hot, so the ground is hot. You can't put that back in the system. Okay, that's true, but that has nothing to do with economics or the fact that there's a maximization of entropy. You move not only to higher and higher forms of the power of machines, but you build an infrastructure that elevates it, as we discussed earlier, in which the machines are embedded. You develop the cognitive power of man in this unlimited potential relative population density. And therefore you find that it's the exact opposite. What may be true for a machine is not true for the physical process of economics and the willful intention of species existence to advance at all. Man is a beautiful species who moves to higher levels of complexity, who moves to higher, more efficient and powerful ideas, to greater forms of organization, not to less. And then LaRouche said, we see this not only in here, but we see it in biology. We see it in living life. Look at the evolution from single cells and so forth, as we know, to what we have, which is not itself the primary question, because the living process and the noetic process always existed in the universe. And we also see it in the behavior of cycles of solar systems, galaxies, and how they perform. There's an anti-entropic principle. In fact, the world is anti-entropic and moving to further and further perfection. And man, as Lynn says in the second point, has this distinction. Through our power and our will, we can increase that rate of anti-entropy. Animals reflect that rate, but they can't change their species' existence. Stone can't. Man can. And that's why that's the center of this thing. So that's, I will just say that, and I hope that really helps, because Lynn uses repeatedly anti-entropy, but if you think of that in this form and the perfection of man's power to increase the rates of anti-entropy and of free energy, which we'll get to in 2 weeks, the free energy question, then you're starting to understand what economics is and how, if we can transmit these ideas as the higher level, then we can affect all the policies that have to be instituted in the world at this very moment, as Dennis began with the introduction at the beginning of this presentation. So if you could just read now, with that as background, and I hope that will help, can we read the other 4 points? And then we'll conclude with that.
Let me just ask Richard. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, yes. Okay, so that means we're starting on point number 6 now, right?
No, we're starting point number 5, Jose.
Excuse me. Got it, yep. At first glance, and can you hear me okay? Is this okay?
Perfect.
Yes.
At first glance, the changes in behavior which enable society to increase its potential relative population density are a matter of observable changes in the relationship between the demographically defined individual person and nature. Thus, we measure matters in terms of changes in physical values per capita and per square kilometer of surface area. From this vantage point, we can estimate the increase in productive powers of labor as having the form of a change in the characteristic curvature of that Riemannian physical space-time geometry, which represents the current state of specific and technological development of practice. In this view, the addition of a valid new universal physical principle changes the characteristic curvature of the physical economic domain of action. the synthesis of a validated universal physical principle, which occurs only through the sovereign hypothesis-generating processes of individual cognition, thus becomes the form of human action, by means of which mankind's power in and over the universe is increased.
Mm-hmm.
Can I continue, right, Rich?
Absolutely.
Okay. However, closer examination of the matter shows that we cannot limit this function of cognition to the matter of validatable discoveries of universal physical principle, since notions of universal principle cannot be transmitted solely by means of sense perception. The ability of society to cooperate in the selection and use of discovered physical principles depends upon replication of the cognitive act of discovery of a principle by one mind in the mind of another. This replication, as it occurs in circumstances such as those of classical humanist forms of education, is known to us as a body of experimentally validated universal principles of classical artistic forms of composition. Through those forms of art, which reference the cognitive processes of mind rather than mere sense perception, we foster the forms of insight needed for effective collaboration in producing and promoting the universal physical principles upon which the anti-entropic increase of mankind's potential relative population density depends. These classical forms include not only what are customarily regarded as the combined plastic and non-plastic art forms, but also the development of literate forms of language, the study of history, and of other matters of statecraft as well.
Terrific.
Thus,
I just want to pause. Wait, just 1 second, Jose. That was very well read. Anything that you want to add or kind of wants to add after these 2 paragraphs? If not, we'll then read the last. Or observe or comment on?
Well, actually, I mean, I do have kind of a question, but I don't want to divert the conversation.
Okay.
So I'd rather save it for the end. Yeah.
Okay. Terrific. Go ahead.
I think we have heard that can finish. You have 2 other points, correct? Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, right. 7 and 8.
Okay. Yeah. You there?
Yep.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Thus, sorry,
yes.
sorry.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Point 7. Thus, the manifold of such universal physical and classical artistic principles represents the principled medium through which mankind acquires both the physical principles and principles of cooperation on which the increase of our species' potential relative population density depends. Move on to point 8. 3 crucial points of economic policy are to be derived from the foregoing considerations. A, that the principal human source of economic growth is the education of the young, a span of development which, for the case of the most advanced economies of the mid-1960s, occupies approximately the first quarter century of the life of increasing portions of the total population of newborn individuals. This means not only a classical humanist form of scientific and artistic education in schools and universities, but conditions of family and community life which are emotionally and otherwise suited to the promotion of self-development of the cognitive powers of the young individual. B. Thus, the students reliving the reenactment of validated original discoveries of universal physical principle and the related role of university-centered fundamental research programs as the principal driving force for proliferation of further scientific and technological progress of the economy as a whole. C, the crucial role of the individual private entrepreneur as distinct from the often golem-like publicly held stock corporation and holding company, especially those occupied with the kinds of machine tool practice related to the design of proof of principle experiments, like the comparable case of the progressive individual farmer, in the pushing forward, the suitably impassioned process of technological progress. A sane form of modern economy demands that the state create the regulated environment and basic economic infrastructure in which the function of the sovereign cognitive powers of the individual serves as the cutting edge of technology-driven, increasingly capital-intensive forms of economic progress at large.
Terrific. If you could read just the last two paragraphs, he sort of rounds out the thought.
Sure. Thus, this form of science, technology, education-driven economic growth is, by its nature, Riemannian in form. The addition of validated new discoveries of universal physical principles expands the multi-connected manifold of universal physical principles being applied. That shift in the manifold is expressed characteristically by a change in the implied physical space-time curvature of action within the economy. This shift, in turn, is reflected in the anti-entropic form of increase of the potential relative population density. It is the rate of change, the rate of increase of productivity so defined, which is the substance of the anti-entropic, quote-unquote, free energy ratio upon which the continued generation of true rather than fictitious profit depends. Those 8 points summarily identify the setting within which the discussion of real rates of economic growth is to be situated.
Terrific. Who's reading, please? This is great.
Isa.
Oh, hi, Isa. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi.
That was good. Yeah, hi. I just want to say on point 8, which we will deal with next week, and it's actually something that Isa mentioned 2 weeks ago. Lynn is putting a lot of emphasis on raising the young. And if you understand the young, not as, well, they're this age, so we have to, take them to soccer games and, make sure they have this. If you think of the young and things like that, if you think of the young as the continuators and advancers of this process of potential relative population density, of anti-entropic development, of the process of the perfection of their mind and the universe, then it becomes a crucial treasure that economy must be geared towards, because it's that cognitive development at higher levels than we currently exist, maybe governed by the same principles, but higher levels. That is what economics is about. Throw out free trade, throw out, gross domestic product, throw out all that other stuff. That's nonsense. This is economics. And what Lynn has just done in these 8 points is given you not only a sweep from the 1600s, but is giving you the fundamental basis for what real economics is and its development and its fight against both information theory, which he doesn't mention here, but these are the same individuals who are pushing entropy as an evil concept to beat people over the head and saying, well, it's true. It's in the science books. Yeah, they're made. The science books are made up. So I will just say that Lynn concludes this paper by returning to the question of how you get a synthetic unit of account, a fixed exchange rate system, and the whole process of a new credit system geared towards the development of the whole world with a special focus on the global South, the global majority. And so it's fascinating that he begins on one level by posing the questions, what do we do? Should we have localized blocks like ASEAN and so forth? But his view is this. And it's very important that when you read economics, there's so much false snares there to try and lure you into getting into some technical this and and all the economists say that. It's not. This is the substance, and it's also the substance of the new economic and security architecture, which, if we can master it, will be the future for mankind. So I will just close by referring to the point I made at the beginning. We're going to have, Kanyan helped put this together, we're going to have Chapter 4 of So You Wish to Learn All About Economics. It's all ready to be sent to everyone. You will get it tomorrow or tonight. It begins with the bar diagram, and it's a wonderful chapter. And you'll be able to read it. You'll have 2 Sundays, this coming Sunday and the next one. My urging to you is read it. Read it as if you're going to teach it to someone, and try and teach it to someone. Because if you do, and you may see words like Boltzmann and this and administrative that and overhead, and some of these things are going to be new to you. Work to get the content. We will discuss it in the same way we're discussing things tonight. Work to get the content. That's the chapter that will give you what LaRouche calls free energy. And if you get the free energy, as opposed to fictitious profit, you then got another measure of this whole process. So let me, but I urge you to take it and don't leave it till Wednesday before the Thursday, the 25th. Start reading it, work on it, work with friends, do whatever where you feel most comfortable doing it. But do work on it, because reading Lynn at first may seem challenging, and it is always. I've been reading LaRouche now for 54 years, and I always find things, I just, my mouth opens. I said, holy cow. So that's what he was really getting at. And it's a wonderful, wonderful exercise, and he is so poetic. But it is essential, and we will be discussing it in 2 weeks.